Welcome to the Kara's Care Show, where we explore the cutting edge of wellness. I'm Kara Sundlun. I want to thank the Center for Advanced Reproductive Services for sponsoring this episode. Now, I think we can all agree that most of us don't like to fight or argue, but we do it. And often we argue most with the people who we're closest with. So is an argument-free relationship even possible? Well, here with the secret to argument-free relationships are two therapists who actually have been married to each other for 50 years on their blueprint to end arguments in all relationships. Wow, that is a big promise. Welcome Linda and Charlie Bloom, who are best-selling authors. Their latest book is An End to Arguing, 101 Valuable Lessons for All Relationships. They're also the founders and co-directors of Bloomwork, and they speak all over the world about how to have happier, more loving relationships. So welcome to both of you. I can't wait for this conversation.
I'm delighted to be with you. Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, both of you.
Me too.
Great. First of all, do all couples argue? Like, isn't that just normal?
It is very normal to have differences, and all couples have them. But there's a whole continuum about the couples who do it with finesse and style and grace. And they're really good communicators. They can negotiate for their needs. They can speak their own truth without the blame and judgment. And then on the other end of the continuum are the ones that wound each other and hurt each other and keep a lot of issues in the denial zone where they don't go away. They just fester and irritate each other. And so, yes, it's commonplace to have differences, but the arguments and the conflict that really causes a lot of pain and suffering, that's the optional part. That's where couples can learn to do it really well.
And Charlie, I'm just going to make a joke that your wife is doing most of the talking. Is that the secret?
Yes, ma'am.
Happy wife, happy life.
I think one of the secrets is to be able to tune in so acutely to where your partner is and to have the motivation to want them to be satisfied with the kind of interaction that you're having. That when both people are doing that, it minimizes the chances of having arguments. And when we use the word argument, we're not talking about differences, and we make that distinction really clear in the beginning of the book, that all couples have differences. And it's the differences themselves that actually make that person attractive to us, because they represent something that we may not have so fully developed within ourselves that we can experience through this relationship. And that's what we call chemistry. So that's something that we really a point that we really try to make is distinguishing inevitable differences to damaging arguments, where we go through these cycles where there's a difference of opinion there are feelings that haven't been dealt with, and rather than resolving them, people try to get the other person to see things the way they want them to see them, to do what they want them to do, to feel what they want them to do. When two people are doing that, we have what we call an argument. And that is unlikely to go anyplace productive until one of them, at least one of them, is willing to really begin to focus on something other than making the other person wrong and being right. And that's the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So, well, you brought up an important point. It only might take one person, at least, if someone's listening and thinking like, I don't know, how do I get my wife to read this book? Or how do I get my husband to read this book? I guess we can start a lot with one half of us. But what do you do? Like, you know, usually there's one person who wants to talk it out more or fight it out more. So what do you do when the person you are arguing with doesn't want to talk about it?
Well, we call that appealing to their enlightened self-interest. And it really takes a lot of diplomacy and finesse to appeal to the other person that there's a lot at stake here. By leaving topics in the denial zone, that's going to keep cropping up again and again and again. What if we lean into the challenge and we really address it? And you need to reassure your partner who's reluctant to engage with you that you will be respectful, that you're not going to try to coerce them into behaving in a way that you want them to behave, or to speak in a way that they don't feel comfortable, that you can do it in small bits. Maybe you just talk for 5 or 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be a lengthy 1 hour, very deep and involved discussion, but you might want to nibble away at it a little bit at a time. And you're absolutely right. There's usually one who likes to process and wants to talk about it and wants to talk about it now. And that person has lessons in patience, that they may need to be patient and persistent and really artful in the way in which they enroll the other person and help them to see that they're going to be better off, that both of you are going to be better off. The relationship is going to be closer and have a higher level of trust and security in it, if those issues are addressed.
So there are 3 words you say to never use in an argument. What are those?
Well, the most important word is the first one of the 3, and that is you.
Okay.
Whenever you start a conversation or you respond to another person, beginning with the word you can be pretty certain that what's going to follow is something that isn't going to feel good to be received by the other person. It's going to probably be some kind of an accusation, like you're just like your mother, or you always forget my birthday, or what's wrong with you? So the second 2 words in that particular example are being defensive. You're being defensive. When people get accused of something, particularly when they get accused of defensiveness, it always activates them. It triggers them. Triggering means that something you've just experienced, something that has activated a very strong negative response from within yourself. And there's a natural inclination to defend yourself against what feels like a wounding. And so one of the things that is helpful to do when you notice that your partner is being defensive or justifying things or excusing themselves or explaining things, which all are forms of defensiveness, is to really look at, instead of trying to get them to stop being defensive, which you can't do, especially by yelling at them, telling them that they, accusing them of that. But what you can do is you can respond non-defensively yourself, that you can bring openness and honest feelings to them without being accusatory, without being judgmental, without trying to get back at them. Using, and in the book we use a lot of examples, because a lot of people they don't know what it even sounds like to respond non-defensively to what's perceived as an attack. So, there are ways that you can do that. You can focus more on what I'm feeling in response to what you just said to me, which is very different than you're being defensive, which comes across absolutely as a judgment and an accusation. So we really encourage people to bring more mindfulness into your interactions. Take a moment, take a breath before you indulge that impulse to get back at that person, to react, to defend, to attack, to withdraw. Take a breath or 2. And it's amazing how quickly you can modulate some of those reactive responses just by taking a breath. That's not the answer, but it's an important first step.
So that's the first step. That was what I was going to ask you, really, is these all sound like great advice, right? And if we are being our adult self, if we are grounded, if we are rested, if we are not hungry, but there is that word trigger, right? And the trigger, so often couples fight over the same things, right? It might be, I'm going to use the example that I think happens in a lot of households. You know, mom comes home and dad's standards of whatever things are supposed to look like and be done are very different. And it's like, oh, the place is a mess. You're always a mess. You never put anything. And like, obviously, you might have a valid point that like things that were promised to be done got forgotten or whatever, but there's that trigger moment where you just, I guess, when we're not being our best self, we might just react and indulge, as you said, getting angry, which sometimes you think, I need to feel angry. What do you do about the people who are like that, who tend to be more reactive and just kind of get triggered and then they regret it later?
Well, we're going to get triggered. That's a given. There are going to be moments where we're overtired or we're stressed or we're irritable and hungry. When we get triggered, we are each challenged. Charlie talks about the breath. We're very fond of taking a moment to pause, to reflect before we act or before we speak. But we often lose it. And we say things we're sorry for. We say things we don't even mean. We have tone in our voice. We have accusation and criticism and so forth, and all the things that take us on the path to hell. And what we have found is the couples who are the most successful are champions of repair. They are willing to fess up when they mess up. And they say, could I do a do-over with that, please? I'm sorry that I had tone in my voice. I realized that I was reactive in that moment. And then they do it in a more genteel way. They can speak their truth without the blame and judgment, without the tone, without the threat, without the yelling, or without going away, which is also very destructive to a relationship, is people who just walk out on the conversation. And so to repair, as soon as we have the composure to do so, we may have to have a timeout. Doesn't have to necessarily be long, but to have a timeout, take a break to pull ourselves together so that when we come back, we can offer a sincere apology, so that we can ask for forgiveness, that we can clean up the mess that we just made and start over, because the issue still needs to be addressed.
Okay. And so that's part of it, right? I love that you said be champions of repair, because at least we get a second chance after we've lost it. But you talk about there are steps actually to address unfinished business. So perhaps if you're fighting about the same thing all the time, maybe there's unfinished business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, chances are very good that there's stuff that needs to be addressed that for whatever reason, there has not been an agreement to address. Usually it's because there's some fear on the part of one or both people that if we open up this can of worms, then it's just going to make things worse. Or I don't trust myself to be able to take a stand with my partner because I think they're just going to push through and try to control me, or it's just going to be too unpleasant. So there's fear there. And it always feels like a risk to bring up something from the past that hasn't been adequately resolved. Resolved doesn't mean that both people come to an understanding where they feel 100% perfect about it and there's no problem, there's no feelings that are residual anymore. It could be, the process sometimes can take a number of different interactions where we take steps towards moving towards reconciliation, towards understanding, towards acceptance, towards forgiveness, towards apology, towards responsibility. And so the first step in that process is to acknowledge, basically just say, hey, you know what, there's some concerns that I have that I wanted, that are really distressing me, and it's getting in my way of really being in this relationship the way I would like us to be together. And I would love to be able to talk about some of these things because I'm sure that we can work through them, but it's not going away. So I really wanted to see if you're open to doing that. And depending upon the response that you get, which could be anything from sure, yeah, I'd love to, let's go, to well, what do you mean? What are you talking about? What's the problem?
Yeah.
So to extend it as a request or an invitation to the person, rather than saying those 4 words that strike terror in the heart of every man. We need to talk.
Okay.
Not a good invitation. Not a good way to begin.
Yes.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, I love that you're saying that, just because I was wondering, the other thing is the importance of committed listening. So I guess that goes back to that we actually have to be ready and open to listen and hear. But you just mentioned we need to talk, as those words don't land well with most men. Is there a difference? I think that's one of the things that we fight about. I always say, but you're not listening to me. Do men or women generally inherently listen better than the other?
I really hesitate.
What did she just say?
Yeah,
See? That was
I hesitate to make generalizations about men and women because there's so many exceptions. But yes, I agree with you that I think women do have an advantage of being committed listeners, and it's a very wise man who takes some tutorials from the women about being patient and persistent, about going over the issues over and over and over again, because some of these issues we have 100 conversations about them or more, and sometimes it's very deep, old stuff. It can be old from childhood, it could be old from adult relationships, but something that's still very tender, and inadvertently we keep banging into each other's sore spots. And so when we get activated that way, we need to pause and reflect. We keep going over this material a lot. There must be a deeper issue here that we need to address at the core, because sometimes the thing that we're arguing about really isn't the issue, but it is an entry point to go deeper to what is this reminiscent of. A lot of it's childhood stuff. We're both therapists, so there's a saying in our field: if it's hysterical, it's historical. So sometimes it goes back many years, and our partners in our life to reactivate some of that old sore material so that we can finally get it right. If we were ignored and we weren't heard, to finally we both become black belt listeners so that we feel heard. If we were dominated and controlled, that we learn how to share power well, so that both people are getting their needs met and being heard and seen and valued for who they are, with their mixed bag self, that we're also imperfect, and that we don't have to be the perfect person. We don't have to be the perfect child anymore, that we can have our weak suits and our great strengths. And this is such an incredible opportunity for couples to heal some of the old wounds from way back.
Yeah.
And if it keeps showing itself, that's a great opportunity to go over it some more.
I like that you call it an opportunity. All right, so we are talking with Linda and Charlie Bloom. They are married for 50 years. They're both therapists, and they've really made their life's work about teaching us to be better at communicating. They have a new book out, and it is The End to Arguing: 101 Valuable Lessons for All Relationships. So you're not just talking, I know we've talked about couples a lot here, but I mean, a lot of the principles in your book are going to be for all relationships, romantic or otherwise, right?
Yes, that's why we wanted to use the word all in the subtitle, because although the focus of the book, many of the examples do involve committed partnerships and marriages, but there are also examples that apply to other kinds of relationships, to work relationships, family relationships, friendships. These principles apply across the board. And the practices that we talk about in the book that allow people to develop some of the qualities that are needed in order to implement these these principles are also addressed in the book. The qualities that will enable us to be more effective and more skilled in our interactions. A lot of self-help books, particularly self-help books about relationships, do give very specific guidelines or suggestions, behavioral suggestions about what you need to do when this is happening, or what it is that you need to understand, or what you need to, what actions need to be taken. But they don't necessarily talk about the resistance that we have to making changes in our relationships, which we all have, and to taking emotional risks, because that's generally what it requires. What keeps us from doing what we believe is probably the best thing to do, what we've been told is, what the books tell us is that there are things that we call competing commitments that are getting in our way of implementing those behaviors. So a competing commitment is any desire that I have that overrides my desire to be vulnerable in the relationship, or to be more honest, or to be more committed, or to do some of the things. There are other things that I want to do. I want to protect myself from certain consequences. I want to avoid certain risks.
Or I want to win the argument, right?
I want to win. Yeah. Well, there's a saying, you can be right or you can have a good relationship. Right. Take your pick. Just can't have it both ways.
Okay. So that's, we learn as kids, it's always better to be kind than right, but we don't always do that. What are some of the most underutilized practices in most relationships?
Let me just say.
Go ahead.
Timeouts are very, very important when you get to that point where we're going down that rabbit hole and this isn't working, and it's only making it worse for us to keep going at it. Take a timeout. Okay. They can be it's like an extended breath, because you're taking it for a certain period of time. But
like go to the bathroom and say, I'm going to breathe. Like just walk out, say, I need to go to the bathroom, I need to breathe. I mean, like how practically, when people are triggered, do you take that time out rather than go down the rabbit hole that you've done 100 times?
It's great to have the agreement in place when you're calm, cool, and collected, so that when you're agitated, you already have it as a baseline and either person can take it. Remember when we agreed to the timeout? I need to take one right now. I need to take one right now. You don't say you're getting overheated and you need to take it. You are responsible in your communication. Yeah. And you say, I need a few minutes to compose myself. I need to think about that. This is so important. I need a few minutes to really be with it. And that time out is so important. Sometimes it just takes a few minutes. Sometimes it takes longer, depending on how overheated we are. But you can steam yourself up to come back and get them in the next round, or you can really work with yourself. I want to be constructive. I want to only talk about my own feelings and needs. I want to be vulnerable and talk about my fears and what hurts me. I don't want to blame. I don't want to shame. I don't want to criticize. I want to stay with my own experience. And then when you have another conversation after the break, you're on more solid footing to have real learning and understanding and connection take place, which makes all the difference in the world.
And obviously this is important as parents. We get triggered with our kids, or our kids maybe get triggered with us, but modeling that I'm going to take a break, just even verbalizing that is a great tool that we could all probably do better at learning that. What about when trust has been broken? So many couples might be wondering, I don't know that I'll get back to where we were before. How do you repair trust when it's been broken?
Step number one is to acknowledge that it's been broken, that there's been a violation or a betrayal or whatever it is that's happened, and that it's it's had an effect on you. And that's the first thing. And to make sure that your partner understands what the impact has been on you, what the experience is that you're having now what's changed as a result of this. So the focus is not on so much on what the other person might have done to cause this breakdown in trust. Because one of the things that we found is that when there is a breakdown in trust, almost inevitably, both people have played some part in that breakdown occurring. It doesn't mean that they're both equally responsible. It doesn't mean it's necessarily 50-50. It just means that if we look at this, we can see how this happened, and then this response occurred, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then it led to this breakdown. Mm-hmm. So the first step is to acknowledge that, see if the other person understands that, to see where they stand on it. If there's been a betrayal where there's a person who feels that the other person has really committed something that's a violation of the agreement, the understanding, the trust that's there, then that has to be acknowledged. But there's got to be an agreement on both parties that we are going to address this issue. We are going to do what we need to do to heal it. There's got to be that intention in this agreement.
I want to add that a very important part of recovering from a very serious breach of trust is the belief that it is even possible.
Right.
Because some people subscribe to the train of thought that once a cheater, always a cheater. Okay. We do not believe that, because over our 4 decades of working with couples, we've seen very gross violations of trust, like being unfaithful, like misconduct with money and secret accounts, and losing life savings, and all kinds of very serious betrayals of trust. But it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy if people think that it's not recoverable. If you believe that it's possible to recover, and you can learn from the unskillful choices that were made, and the commitment is strong, no matter what it takes, no matter how long it takes, we want to preserve that which is good about this relationship, and we are going to learn from it. And it's possible for not only all of the trust that has been damaged to be restored, but then some, because of all the time and attention and care that had to be put into the repair work.
Linda and Charlie Bloom, this is the end of this broadcast, but we've learned so much. I want everyone to know, again, the book, it's out there right now. It's An End to Arguing, 101 Valuable Lessons for All Relationships. Actually, it drops Valentine's Day, but you could pre-order it. And the website where you can get really into this and see I know you do some virtual classes for couples. Maybe you can answer the question if they actually need a couples therapist. Your website is Bloom Work. It's on the screen right now, bloomwork.com. Thank you both so much for joining us for some cutting edge wellness, and I'm anxious to try out some of your tips.
We're coming to New England. We're going to be teaching in Kripalu in 2 weeks. We're coming to Massachusetts, to the Berkshire Mountains.
Oh my goodness. Well, if as of this date, if you're listening now on January 6th, go to Kripalu's website. Maybe you and your significant other can sign up and make a breakthrough this year. The resolution to not argue anymore, to just have nice conflict. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great.
We enjoyed it.
Thank you both. And they really are experts in their field. I encourage you to take a look at their other books and their website. You can really learn a lot. Thank you for joining us for this cutting edge conversation in wellness. Have a great day and be well.